Hello and welcome to our latest episode in the AI mini-series. And today we will be talking about GEO, so Generative Engine Optimization. This follows on from our session that we ran a couple of weeks ago where I chatted to Rob about some of the most commonly asked questions around generative engine optimization. But today's session is about taking a bit more of a deep dive into GEO and what a strategy should include. And at the end of this session, you should have some real sort of actionable insights. My name is Brad. I'm a digital marketing consultant at Elixirr, and I have with me Christian.
Hi everyone, I'm Christian. I am an SEO specialist here at Elixirr Digital. So I usually work on traditional search engines, but lately been throwing myself along with the team into GEO as well.
Okay, let's start by setting the scene. The world has already changed. ChatGPT has become the 5th most visited website now worldwide. It's up there with Google Search, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all the platforms that you typically see within a digital marketing strategy. It receives more than 1 million visitors now every week. So it's significant. And it's not just about the LLMs, it's about the way that users are also interacting with search engines. So we're seeing a huge decline in traffic because lots of users are now using that AI overview and they're getting the answers that they actually need within the search engines. There's no need to click through. And in 60% of cases, those searches will end without a click. So, and it's not just about consumers, it's also having a huge impact on the world of B2B marketing as well. Big stat here, 79% of global B2B buyers say AI search has already changed the way they conduct research. So it's definitely something that we need to think about when we're B2B marketeers and thinking about how we reach our customers.
Yeah, definitely. And one really interesting talking point here, Brad, is the one about 58% of searches ending without a click. So this is something we've actually observed firsthand with our clients. A lot of clients have seen sort of click-through rates dropping. There's been a lot of talk online about this as well as a sort of general trend. So it's definitely something that we need to sort of try and work around with our strategies, sort of explain to clients, talk to them about. But the truth is now that, there are far fewer clicks because answers are being provided in the results page without needing to click through. So something for us to definitely be aware of as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've seen instances with our clients where we're actually being asked just to investigate that very scenario where we're trying to understand. We're seeing a decline in traffic, and we need to understand where that decline's coming from. Can we put it down to simply AI overviews, or is there something else going on? Because we have seen decline. So understanding that and then learning how to arrest that decline or put a strategy in place to counteract it is really, really important.
When we look at the sort of change between traditional SEO and GEO, we can kind of see the evolution that we've experienced, especially in sort of recent years. So going back as far as 2015, back then it was very much the traditional, 10 blue links on a page. Google had 90% of the share, very dominant, and visibility was all about ranking high on Google. So ranking position 1, and that's where all the traffic sort of went through. Moving on a bit to 2020, sort of rich results were introduced, things like featured snippets, things like people also ask. So now there's more ways to get visibility and to appear in Google, and SEO is starting to shift towards structured content already at this point. 23 AI overviews were introduced, and they were sort of rolled out sort of gradually over time, and now they're all very frequent, and we've all seen them. But back then it's shifting again away from feature snippets and now more towards being cited by AI. So that was the sort of first kind of introduction we had to it. And now in 2025, they're really commonplace. And there's even new sort of models being introduced. There's AI mode. There's multiple discovery engines. There's ChatGPT. There's Perplexity. There's so many of these tools available now, and being present in them is where we get our visibility from. And it's no longer just about ranking on the first page. It's now about being part of an answer. That's important. So there's definitely been a sort of a shift from search and click to now ask and receive.
100%, and I'm old enough actually to have experienced that whole journey, and actually beyond, right back to 2003, I think, when I first began in digital. And I think what's apparent is that clear evolution, and there's these new ideas that are tested within a sample group or within a geography or in whatever environment, and these ideas begin as ideas, and after a short while they become the default answer. So at the minute we have the 10 blue links as a default answer, and we have AI mode on the side, but I think it's only a matter of time before that is reversed and AI mode becomes the default answer. So it does really place an emphasis on how important it is right now to get AI in search right.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we've touched on how this has impacted user behavior, and some of that is about where users go to get the answers to their questions, but it's also about how they're getting those answers. So particularly for users who might be researching complex topics. So there's an example here that looks at R&D tax credits, and in a traditional search journey what you would see is you'd see a user begin with a broad search around R&D tax credit, and then you would see them visit multiple different sites, so government websites, could be explainer content on YouTube, could be blogs, and they would start to sort of search that broad journey, and then they would refine that over time, looking at different providers and then narrowing the providers, and eventually they would reach out to one or two, having gone through this long journey that can take a month in many cases. But what's happened now is that journey is completely different, and it could start with just one single prompt that doesn't just ask the broad question, but it has lots of context, and it has even an expectation about what they're hoping to return within that prompt. And the LLM will then go away and actually build upon that prompt. So they won't just directly answer that question. They'll actually consider further questions that will help support that user journey, and they will come back with clear providers and make a recommendation. And what's really key here is trust. So buyers are increasingly trusting AI to guide them to providers, which means that if you're not in the LLMs, you're missing that opportunity of high intent traffic that could be ready to act pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And something else to note here is the higher conversion rates that we see through AI traffic, and partially that is because users are able to have this conversation with the LLM first, and ask questions, go really in depth, and get complex information they need to inform their decisions. So by the time they actually make it onto the website, they're already sort of warmed up. They're confident they're in the right place, and that's why they're in a much higher position to convert.
100%. So we definitely have clients that have fed back. Oh, do we need to think about GEO at this point? The traffic is only 0.5%, 1%, but when you actually consider that traffic could be converting up to 8 times what traditional search converts as, it makes that channel now a bit more of a significant channel, and it's growing. So again, it's really important to think about your strategy here.
Absolutely, yeah. Um, so when we look at the sort of the why and why GEO has become so popular, assessing user behavior shifts really helps to understand that. And one really good illustration of that is the query length. So the average sort of query length in a traditional search engine is about 3 to 5 words. Google searches tend to be things like restaurant near me, or how does this work, or how does that work. Whereas in LLMs, the average query length is about 20 to 25 words. So people are able to be, much more conversational. They're able to ask complex questions with multiple clauses, and really get that sort of granular detail. So the example we have here is, I'm going to a picnic this weekend with friends. One of my friends is allergic to peanuts. Suggest some food I can take with me. So that's obviously like, really complex question. If you were to search for that in Google, it would take you multiple searches to get what you're looking for. But in an LLM, you can get one succinct answer back, which just saves a lot of time and is much more easy to consume. There's also a sort of difference in general intent and interaction style. So sort of location-based searches might be better suited to traditional search, whereas being more exploratory and asking problem-solving questions are definitely suited better towards LLMs. Another sort of not drawback, but something that we tend to see with traditional search is kind of one-off limited searches, whereas with an LLM you can actually craft a dialogue. It's almost like having a conversation with somebody, which is really useful when you're trying to think up of ideas or get new topics. And that in turn means the results are different as well. And another sort of key point is the feedback loop is much more satisfying in an LLM compared to traditional search. And that's because you can keep probing and you can keep going until you're happy, until you can ask for more feedback, you can ask it to change something or focus more on this area. So yeah, it's much more user friendly in that sense.
100%, and we've seen shifts, these sort of shifts in user behavior before. One that stands out to me is TikTok being used as a search engine, and particularly for the travel industry. So as you pointed out here, the expectation of results is completely different. In the same way that the way that users searched for travel locations and for travel ideas on TikTok, what they were hoping for was more like a short form video, a more sort of authentic video of whatever that might be, a hotel or a destination, and within the LLMs they're expecting all the answers quickly, really comprehensive, and almost the answers to questions they haven't even asked, which is a big change. So we know the world of search has changed. We know that the way that users are interacting with search is different. So what does this mean for how we optimize our websites and our content to appear within these LLMs and AI overviews? And really good SEO and a good SEO foundation will get you some of the way. So there's still really important activities that you would undertake as part of an SEO strategy that will get you within the LLMs to a certain degree. So it's really important still to have user-centric content, to have a website that's technically sound, do your keyword research, have good authority, and make sure that your website loads quickly and easily without any kind of technical errors. But some of these traditional activities also need to be dialed up and become more important for the LLMs. The way that they gather content and surface results it's quite different. So they've got other priorities. And for instance, EEAT and the freshness of content is really, really big. So you need to be shouting about the expertise of your team if you're writing blogs and timestamping. Schema and structured data helps LLMs to understand what the content is. So really, really important you get that right. Being really consistent with your entity optimization, the way that you talk about your entities, again, really important. But where things start to get a little bit different is around prompt research. As one activity, it's not as straightforward as it might be for traditional SEO. Traditional SEO, we can actually we can draw data from the different search engines. We understand what the search terms are, what the search volume is of those, but the prompt research requires a little bit more of a manual process, which we'll talk a little bit on that later as well. The landscape and the results, again, they're not as straightforward as traditional search. With traditional search, we can use tools to understand which key terms you're ranking for in what position, but it's just more complex within the LLMs. There's lots of different LLMs, there's different types of LLMs, and understanding not only are you appearing, but when you're being spoken about, being is your brand being reflected accurately? Is there positive sentiment? And that brings us on to sort of tracking and measurement. Again, we need different tools. There's different tools to traditional SEO to be able to understand that landscape. And lastly, yeah, the technical and content side of things. So again, thinking about the three pillars that might sit under a traditional SEO strategy, just because from a technical perspective you're doing well within the search engines doesn't mean that LLMs are able to crawl your site, understand your content, and it's just really important that you're able to look at that as well as a separate activity, as well as obviously considering how you structure and what content you create.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this does a really good job of showing how you can get some good GEO results as a byproduct of having a really strong SEO foundation. However, there is so much more that can be done to build on that even further. So, it is good to see that some GEO results are coming in through SEO, but there's also so much more we can be doing. particularly like you mentioned, there are now whole new tools with entire suite of tools with different dashboards and measurements and metrics specifically for GEO. So in that sense, it is completely separate to the SEO software we've been using previously.
Which brings us on to prompt data.
Yeah. So unfortunately, as we just mentioned, we can't use the same methods for researching prompts as we do for keywords. Traditional keyword research, we can get search volumes and understand how many people are looking for it in a certain period of time. Whereas with prompts, they are actually hidden. So because the LLMs operate in closed ecosystems, we can't access that data. But this isn't too much of a problem because as we've mentioned, the prompts can be almost anything. They can be incredibly long tail, complex, unique. So we can get a good, we can sort of use other resources to try and understand what those prompts might be. As you can imagine, a prompt with 25 words in it could be difficult to try and guess. However, there's a lot of tools at our disposal. So there's things like we can still use traditional keyword research, but just go for the longer tail queries. We can then combine this with things like people also ask, or we can take insights from social listening. So there's Reddit, people have discussions on Instagram, on TikTok. We can also use real life sort of data for customer facing teams and understanding what the pain points are and what types of questions people do ask frequently in the real world, as well as customer interviews, personas. And we can kind of combine all of this together into the sort of complex questions that people are likely to ask, and then we can then use that to sort of as our prompt research, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any client should know their customer, and as you say, with first party insights, you can get a really good idea of what questions your customers will be asking within the LLMs. Whether you have real prompt data, as you said, it's largely not useful anyway, because most prompts are completely unique unless you're really sort of mainstream. What are the best trainers for running on the road, or wherever that might be? Largely in the B2B world, it's going to be complex context added prompts where they will be unique. So we can still get the prompt data that we need. But on top of that, and this is another reason why, of course, the prompt data is really important, or the prompts research is really important, but it's also fundamental to understand how the LLMs work. And in fact, when you create a prompt, the LLMs actually read that prompt, and unlike traditional search where you would ask what is R&D tax, and you would get everyone to a certain degree would get the same 10 links and the same answer. What's different within the LLMs is they actually interpret that question, and then they break that down into lots of subtopics, and these are called query fanouts. And the query fanouts really explore different user intents across the entire buyer journey. So they could be things like informational, so what counts as R&D for HMRC purposes. They could be comparison type queries, so what's the difference between SME and our RDEC systems. They could be qualification questions, so do software or data science projects qualify? And they go on, and they even go as far as identifying different sources of answers. So in this case, it's saying what are Reddit user opinions of R&D tax consultants in the UK. So they're looking for social proof on which providers are best for their user that's doing that search. And it's really important to understand from your category, where are the LLMs drawing this information from, because that is what will inform your GEO strategy and the content that you create, and how you look to become more visible within the LLMs.
Yeah, definitely. And I think these query fanouts do a really good job of showing the kind of scale and depth as well of the AI's database and how much knowledge they really have. And they can create, really complete and coherent answers just because of how many things they consider when you ask it a question.
Yeah.
So looking at how we actually get into the models is quite interesting. So there are two routes that you can go down to get this extra visibility. The first one is a direct route. and that is where your site, maybe your articles, your research is being directly cited by the AI tool. So this will be things like on-site optimization, maybe some of your content hubs or your structured Q&A formats would start to come in. And the second route is known as the indirect route. So AI doesn't cite you directly, but it mentions you because other trusted sources do. So this is where, things like Reddit threads, maybe being mentioned in an industry blog, a YouTube review, or any kind of reference to your brand. So, if those pages have been scraped or summarized by the AI tool, yeah, you will still get a mention, which is also really valuable, right? Because ultimately you're still appearing in the answer, and if you're there, you're visible, and then a user might, they might manually search for you afterwards. You might stick in their mind a little bit. So yeah, it's really interesting to see that it's not all about being cited. We're ultimately just trying to be a part of that answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And that direct route is the example of where traditional search will get you some of the way. It doesn't guarantee you, but you will likely, if you're doing good SEO, you will likely appear to a certain extent within the LLMs. But really, in other words, when we talk about GEO, it's not it's a blend of being cited and being talked about to a certain degree. So if you're only optimizing your own pages and following traditional SEO, you've only got half the picture really, and there's a whole nother opportunity to drive mentions through third parties, which drives visibility and will attract new customers for sure. So with understanding how the LLMs interpret these prompts, you can then think about the content that you need to create. If you understand that landscape for your category, what are the query fan outs, then you can create content that reflects that landscape, those query fan outs, those prompts. And what's different here is it's about answering all the different subsets of questions. You need to sort of answer every facet of a topic. So if carrying on with the example of R&D tax credits, you want to share information on the qualification process, the eligibility, compliance and risk and governance, the claim processes, what documents do you need, different financial treatment, and technology and tools and automation. So they're all big topics, and this is similar to the sort of hub and spoke approach that we would take for good white hat SEO, where you have maybe a service page that broadly covers a topic, but then you have these spoke pages that give in-depth detail around all the different facets of R&D tax credits, and really that's the ideal way to create content for LLMs, and you can do that in a way that doesn't feel like it's at the detriment of the user experience. So FAQ hubs, insight libraries, help centers, lots of different ways that you can share all this information and basically feed the AI with the content that they need to surface your brand and your information.
Yeah, exactly. And this might at first glance seem a bit overwhelming,
Yeah.
but it's important to remember that there's a limit to how much content humans can consume, but there is no limit to how much content these generative AI tools can consume. They can take on, vast amounts of data and research, and they're trained on it, sort of constantly. So ideally, yeah, like Brad said, we'd have some kind of content to cover every attribute or aspect of our services and products, so that when people do come along and ask these really complex, 25 words or more questions, the AI has something to pull on to provide those answers. And obviously, this isn't something that needs to be done immediately or overnight, and this is a lot of content that needs to be made. But we have to be ready to sort of dial up and scale up our content production to match the needs of these tools.
Yeah, and this goes again, it goes back to the point, doesn't it, around building prompt data and that first party insight and gathering that. Because if by going out to your teams, by going out to your account management teams, your customer support teams, by building a picture of all the types of questions that your business might be asked, if you can document them and list them on the website, it's it's good for AI, of course it is, but it's also good for the user. It creates an opportunity to either give the user what it needs, but also surface your brand within the LLMs while the user is perhaps a bit early in that journey, driving awareness. And again, obviously, there's real commercial benefits to that.
Okay, so looking at how we measure GEO success, so just like any marketing strategy, we need both, soft metrics and hard metrics as well. So these are sort of leading indicators and business impact. So the soft layer tells us if we're in the conversation, right? So that's where we can track, how many pages are being crawled, how many mentions that we have, the sentiment of those mentions. Although there are still some blind spots, we're still kind of in the early stages in terms of tracking. So there's some limitations there, but we can get some kind of a view of our visibility, how much we're being mentioned as well. And then eventually, ideally, we'd be able to track this into sort of traffic and engagement, and then leads, and then sales, and that would be the end goal, is having a full end-to-end understanding of it. Where we are at the moment is there's quite a few tools out there that can give us lots of information, like we can see here in the top right of the screen. So we have dashboards that show a kind of overall AI success score. We can look at percentage of citations, what percentage of our overall search is appearing in generative AI, which is really useful to see, and definitely something that we'll be tracking going forward in the years to come as well.
Absolutely, and again, it's hard not to draw comparisons with SEO, but what we don't have is impression data, click-through rates, rankings. Those metrics aren't there, but obviously we do have familiar ones, and then we have some new metrics. So it's still putting together, looking at the performance across the whole journey really, and then you can put together a KPI framework that allows you to clearly see growth. It's just there are a few challenges, as Christian said, at this stage. So lastly, we're getting towards the end of the presentation, but I think it's important to obviously share how we would approach GEO and what a workflow might look like. And I think it's important to say this isn't a one-off project. It's an ongoing cycle. And really, it would begin with that really thorough prompt research that we've talked about. So getting a clear picture around the kind of questions that customers are going to ask, and using that as a way to track visibility within the different LLMs. Once you have your prompt data, that obviously allows you to review the landscape. So what are the query fan outs? What competitors are appearing? What are the trusted sources within your category that the LLMs are using to draw different information and surface the answers that they need? And again, this point about the crawlability audit, just because you're being crawled by Google doesn't mean that Perplexity, ChatGPT, Gemini, all the different chatbots are managing to not only crawl your site but able to read your content and clearly interpret it. So that's again really important you do that. Once we've done that landscape review, we then need to build almost a hypothesis or an optimization plan. There will be some clear activities that we can put in place around perhaps technical changes or changes within schema that we're confident are going to have a positive impact immediately, but largely there will be there's a lot of unknown. We have seen clear results, but it does differ from client to client and category to category. So what we need to do is implement some initial changes, but then build a kind of a theoretical plan for increasing optimization, and that would have lots of different elements around content and brand mentions and structure and schema and lots of different elements. And then we would put that through a kind of a test and learn format or framework, where we will start to make small changes to areas of the site with a hypothesis. So if we were to change the structure here of this page, if we were to add this this piece of content, will that have a positive impact? Will that either get a surface within the LLMs, or will it actually change the content that is within the answer for that particular prompt? And once we start to see a positive outcome of those tests, of course, the next step is to scale that. So making sure that we roll that out into other areas. And then again, we start the process again, and we start thinking about the next test. And at the end of this, by going through this process, you will increase visibility within the LLMs, and you'll clearly be able to see growth and progress. So yeah, it's a pretty safe approach.
Yeah, and like you say, fairly similar to what we already do and things that we're familiar with, but just deploying it in a different way with a different goal, right? To get a different type of visibility. It's not just about where you rank anymore. It's just about trying to be part of that answer and get a little bit of that share of visibility in the SERPs any way that you can. And now that this has become such a huge part of what's on the page, it's really important that we're doing all these things. Prompt research so important. Landscape review, again, very different to what we've done prior. So yeah, we're definitely getting there in terms of the full picture of what we need to do to get on that first page. Yep. So just to close up now, we're gonna end on the same note that we started with, and that is that AI is it's not on its way; it's already here, and the future of it definitely belongs to those who are preparing for it now. Like we saw with the early adopters of SEO, they had a really good sort of head start, and that kind of growth has continued, and we expect the same opportunity is here right now for GEO. So we need to start thinking about AI as another customer. What do they need, and how can we sort of work with AI to get the results we want? And experimenting, testing, and learning is the best way to do that.
100%. Okay, well, thank you everyone. Thank you for listening. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.